Let's face it, drawing characters are hard. Trying to paint them and color them is even harder. In fact, in order to make it look appealing, you need to understand the fundamentals of form, lighting, and posing. These skills take time, and a lot of trial and error is involved, but there are things you can do that can help you get on the right track, especially tip number 6 and 7. Here are 10 things that leveled up my stylized character paintings. Number 1, using reference. This can be many things. You can go on Unsplash and grab photos, you can take your own photos, you can get inspiration from Instagram, or pose your own models in Blender. There's different ways to do this, but they all get the same job done. The way we generate new ideas is combining different existing ideas, and it's very hard for us to generate things and concepts from scratch. For this drawing, I'm using my sticky bone figures to get the desired pose. I like this method because it's a lot easier to get the angle I want, and the figure is already broken down, so it makes deconstructing him a lot easier. To make my pose more interesting, I'm using a fisheye lens, and I'm adding foreshortening to the image. Having a weird angle or adding foreshortening will help those poses look dynamic. In Photoshop, I'm going to trace the form as a base. I'm not outlining him, but rather I'm marking down the planes of fields of the image. After that, I grabbed some inspiration artwork to help me come up with the concept. I learned a lot from studying Artem Slop's work, and he has contributed a lot to my overall style. Number 2, use different line weights. A lot of beginner artists use the same line weight throughout the whole character, and it makes everything look a bit more flat. In general, you want the outside lines to be thicker than the inside details. On top of that, where two objects are touching or where a line is in shadow, you want those lines to be slightly thicker. Just press this button to enable the pen pressure and then press a little harder. Number 3, establishing flat colors and masking layers. Okay, so this part sucks a lot, but it's extremely helpful as far as controlling your shading and making your paintings look a lot more crisp. First, I have my base layer, and this is where I get to see the silhouette. If your silhouette looks boring, your image is gonna look boring. After the silhouette, I'm breaking down my character into separate layers. That way, I have different masks to work on in the future. Usually I want like separate parts of clothing to be their own layer. That way I can shade them a lot faster. This part is super tedious, but it's gonna allow you to change the color scheme if you need to in the future. Number 4, adding hue variations. So this step is kind of optional, but if you want to add more colorful / whimsical vibe to your illustration, it's going to help a lot. It's going to give your painting a little bit more of a painterly look. You usually want to do this before you go into shading. Make a new layer above your flat color and change the blending mode to hue. Sample the section you want and just shift the hue a little bit. Don't mess with the values, just the hue. You can get crazy with the hue, add purples, red, greens. You can always turn down the opacity if it gets too intense. Number 5, shading with the multiply layer. Now this was a game changer for me. When it comes to shading, there's so many ways to do it, but for me, I like to use the multiply layer because it gives me the most control in my work. On a layer above the textures and hues, choose a dark purple or your shadow color and lower the opacity. I'm going to start shading the ambient occlusion area first. Look for any point of contact and shade it with the soft airbrush. Just darken it up a little bit. Don't go overboard, you want to be subtle. The point of ambient occlusion is to show contact points such as closed folds or objects touching each other. On another layer, you're going to do the exact same thing except you're going to be painting your shadows. The nice thing is that the shadow is on a different layer and you're not overwriting your flat colors. You can easily make adjustments. If you feel more comfortable painting in light, do this instead. Create a new layer, hold Alt and assign it to your mask. Go to the paint bucket or gradient tool and fill in the color with like a dark purple. Set the blend mode to multiply. Make a masking layer if it doesn't have one. Click on that circle panel on the bottom and it should look like this. Click on your masking layer, adjust your opacity, and start painting in your light source. Everything that you paint black is going to be light and everything you paint white is going to be dark. Number 6, the airbrush. A lot of beginner art tutorials tell you to avoid this tool when learning to paint digitally, and I get what they're saying. They want you to practice edge control and value control with a thick hard brush, and it's very easy to muddy your value with this tool if you use it incorrectly. But at the same time, this tool is extremely valuable, and let me show you how to use it. So you want to use some sort of selection and then lightly airbrush that area. If you're still struggling with shading and form, definitely use this tool sparingly, but at the same time, it's good to experiment with this tool. The cool thing is that it's on a separate layer, and if you hate it, you can just delete this layer. Number 7, the polygon tool. Now this tool is amazing and goes hand in hand with the airbrush tool. If you like Valorant art style or anything that has that polygon look to it, this is the key. First, make your selection, keep in mind of shape language. I like to make a bunch of triangles and then take a soft airbrush and shade in your shadows. Doing this method will help keep your edges intact and give you a lot more control rather than trying to freehand it. It's very tedious, yes, and if you want a more organic look, just use the lasso tool instead. Number 8, textures. By this stage of your painting, you should have most of your shading done. For me, I treat this as an overpaint, so I'm just drawing on top of the shadow layer. I like to use a comb brush and a halftone brush to help break up some areas of the painting. Pretty much, if I see a shadow transition, I'll add a halftone to it. Honestly, play around with it. Sometimes less is more, and sometimes it's okay to go crazy. With the comb and halftone brush, I like to stay away from my focal point because I'm pretty loose with this step. Usually with this step, it kind of acts as a blur, so you're just going to be taking away details pretty much. You're going to muddy up some stuff, and that's okay because that's what you want. That's how you add interest, by having a lot of details in one area and less than the other. Number 9, gradients. Okay, so this acts as a color filter. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's easy to apply. You want to add this to help unify your colors. On the very top layer, make a gradient and then change the blend mode to soft light or overlay, anything you like to be honest, and then lower the opacity. You can also do this with your character layer mask or different layer masks, but this is a quick thing to add. Number 10, background details. Sometimes plain backgrounds do work, but sometimes you want to add more. For me, I like to add clouds and a bright light source around the subject. Think of these elements as like a picture frame. This bright pop of color is behind my character to draw you in, and the clouds are literally pointing at my robot saying, hey, look at him. Notice how I didn't outline them? I'm not rendering it too much, and it's just a single color. It's a simple trick, but it helps a lot, and you don't have to work yourself to death for every background. Don't get me wrong, they look amazing, but it's okay to be a little lazy. Because you guys are so amazing, I'm gonna give you guys 2 bonus tips. Number 11, particles. This is like the finishing step, and I like to add dust particles. You can do snow, rain, or anything, but they serve the same purpose as the clouds, but in the foreground. For my dust particles, I like to give them like a flow, so I'm making them go a little bit diagonal to show the change in wind. Once I get my particles, I like to take a soft erase brush and push some of them back just to add a little bit of depth. You can also use a Gaussian blur on some of them, and that helps, gives you like a little depth of field. Number 12, glowing effects. Everyone likes fire and magic, so let's add that. With the hard brush, set it to like a bright yellow, and then draw the basic shape. I like to have it loop around my character because it kind of shows the 3D space. Next, add some particles. Duplicate that layer and add a Gaussian blur. Make it slightly darker and more saturated, and now change the blend mode to hard light or soft light and lower the opacity. And there you go, that's an easy way to make magic and glowing effect. Alright, so that's pretty much my workflow when it comes to drawing my characters. Art is pretty subjective, and there's many ways to do one thing. These are the techniques that helped me a lot when I did my character illustration. Just remember that keeping the form is very important. Form will make or break your painting. But how do you establish form? Well, I got you covered. Check out this video on how not to suck at digital painting to learn more.